Society considers itself free only because it cannot see the chains it has created, stated Alan Watts in one of his most provocative speeches. This reflection contains the core of what will be addressed here, namely the idea that there is a great deception in contemporary reality, a thin veil capable of hiding the true nature of people and of fueling a sense of profound dissatisfaction. Before getting into the heart of the concepts, it is worth asking what the reason is why, despite technological progress and apparent well-being, feelings of emptiness, alienation, and disconnection emerge. Statistics released by various international organizations indicate a constant growth of problems related to the psychological sphere, a phenomenon that cannot be considered a simple coincidence, but appears more and more as the consequence of a system that has lost its way. This video aims to reveal the hidden gears of an apparatus based on accumulation, competition, and the constant rush to get somewhere without knowing where, using the thinking of an extraordinary philosopher who has been able to combine Western and Eastern perspectives, Alan Watts. He was born in 1915 in Chislehurst, a suburb of London, and showed from childhood a lively passion for mystery, spirituality, and philosophy. The family in which he grew up was rather traditional, yet curiosity pushed him to explore unconventional cultural territories, especially in reference to Eastern doctrines. As a youth, he came into contact with Buddhism and Zen, becoming fascinated by the way these traditions addressed concepts related to the nature of the mind and impermanence. He later moved to the United States, where he found an environment already open to cultural experimentation, especially in the period between the 1950s and 1960s, a time of social unrest and great transformations in which civil rights movements and criticisms of standardized lifestyles multiplied. The encounter with academic circles and personalities in search of a new vision of the world further fueled his thinking. Defining Watts as a simple professor or essayist would be reductive. Rather, he represented a bridge between two visions of existence, the Western one, with its emphasis on rationality and profit, and the Eastern one, which insists on contemplation and the direct experience of reality. It was in a historical context in which society was moving from the post-war period to a frenetic race towards economic well-being that the basis for his most profound reflections on the deception of modernity developed. During the period referred to, the Western world was experiencing a time of material reconstruction and consumerist growth. Big cities were populated with cars, factories, offices, and dreams linked to financial stability, careers, and an idea of success often measured in terms of purchasing power spread throughout the collective fabric. The political tensions of the Cold War still influence the mass mentality, stimulating the production of increasingly advanced technologies and devices. In this scenario, the individual was encouraged to run, to keep up, to fit his or her identity into standardized patterns of personal fulfillment, while natural rhythms and the contemplative dimension took a back seat. Pop culture, television, and mass media were still in a phase of expansion and were beginning to influence customs in a widespread manner, shaping aspirations and desires. It was precisely during this period that Alan Watts began to circulate his thoughts, highlighting how, behind the facade of well-being, the conditions for a large-scale existential crisis were being created. This historical context provided fertile ground for his criticism of a model of life that, while appearing solid, showed signs of fragility in the relationship between man, society, and nature. Moving to the heart of the matter, it appears clear how modern society and its collective illusions represent a fundamental node for understanding today's crisis. Deception arises from a combination of factors, such as the compulsive need to gain recognition through work, the ambition to own expensive goods, and the anxiety of achieving unattainable perfection. According to Alan Watts, this trend has transformed tools created to simplify existence, such as money and technology, into masters of our daily lives. We end up feeling obliged to chase an accumulation without a clearly defined goal. At first glance, we have the illusion of gaining security, but deep down, a sense of emptiness emerges, an absence of connection with what really matters. We focus on quantitative parameters, such as productivity and appearance, forgetting that human beings also have an inner sphere that needs to be listened to and cared for. Watts, inspired by Eastern philosophies, warned against the risk of confusing the map with the territory, that is, of exchanging conceptual representations, such as social prestige, with actual reality. The consequences of this confusion manifest themselves in widespread alienation, in which we enter into competition with others rather than building authentic relationships. In this context, it is easy to understand why the obsession with productivity and the endless race fuel a general malaise. We wake up with the thought of having to reach new professional or personal goals, sometimes not even freely chosen, but imposed by silently accepted rules. We buy more than what is truly useful. We lock ourselves into an existence marked by deadlines, shifts, schedules, in the hope that continuous commitment will soon lead to lasting gratification. The human being is like a runner who always sees the finish line one step ahead, Watts argued, emphasizing the inability to stop and observe what is happening in the present. This attitude erodes internal balance, generating a state of burnout that, according to numerous studies, massively affects the working population in many countries. Not only physical health suffers, but also mental health, with emotional fatigue and apathy taking over. If you like, it would be kind to support our work. It would be very precious for us, thanks to the many friends and supporters of the channel. Another determining element is the loneliness and inner emptiness that emerge despite the advancement of very powerful means of communication. The ability to connect with anyone at any time doesn't necessarily lead to more fulfilling relationships or a deeper sense of belonging. In fact, too much superficial interaction can lead to the feeling of never having truly meaningful relationships. Watts insisted that the human being is ultimately part of a larger whole, comparing him to a wave in the ocean, unique and at the same time inseparable from the whole. When we isolate ourselves, pursuing an exasperated individualism, we end up feeding a vicious circle of disconnection that produces a void that is difficult to fill with material goods or symbolic status. Fear of uncertainty and obsessive control deserve special mention. In many Western cultural contexts, it is taught that the unexpected is something to be avoided. This is why we develop elaborate strategies to control every area of life, from finances to planning for the future to interpersonal dynamics. However, we forget that existence often follows unpredictable paths, and that trying to block the flow of what happens, in addition to being useless, generates suffering. Watts made a very direct comparison. It is like trying to grab water with your hands. The harder you squeeze, the more the water escapes. The same phenomenon is found in individuals overwhelmed by the anxiety of failure or of not living up to expectations, always on the edge of a razor's edge due to duties that appear pressing and unavoidable. For Watts, a further element of reflection is the relationship with nature. Rapid urbanization and a technology-driven lifestyle have led us to consider nature as a separate entity, a resource to be exploited, or simply a backdrop to be absent-mindedly admired. Yet, To distance oneself from the natural world also means to distance oneself from a fundamental part of oneself. Moving one's existence into mechanisms made of concrete, screens, and automated processes can make one lose touch with ancestral rhythms, such as the alternation of day and night or the seasons, which once structured life. In Watts's writings and conferences, we often find the invitation to re-establish an authentic bond with the earth, precisely because spirituality, in his thought, is also the ability to live in harmony with the surrounding environment. The race for infinite progress, understood as the idea that productivity must always be increased, is another illusory gear. There are ideas and tools created to improve life, but if they become ends in themselves, they transform existence into a race without a finish line. It is surprising to note how technological innovations, born to simplify, have transformed into additional sources of stress, continuous notifications, the need to be constantly available, information overload. It is a singular contradiction that we seek solutions to problems that, in many cases, would not exist if it were not for hyper-technologization. Watts's observation suggests reviewing one's priorities, recognizing that happiness coincides with the possibility of enjoying the present moment without feeling constantly pressured to do more. From this perspective, it becomes evident that one of the main reasons why deception is not clearly perceived is the daily frenzy. People find themselves rushing from one commitment to another, obsessively looking into the future, never stopping to observe what is happening in the here and now. It is as if one were on a moving train, where the external landscape is captured only fleetingly. The distractions multiply and seem to be constructed specifically to avoid any contact with the most uncomfortable questions. It is preferable to proceed head down, without raising doubts about the foundations of a system that involves an accumulation of objectives and constant competition. Yet the first step to get out of this labyrinth is to admit that there is a problem and that perhaps the current model is not the only possible one. Breaking the cycle of distractions involves a return to mindfulness, a concept often linked to meditative practices that have been taught in various traditions for centuries. Watts invited us to experience awareness through daily actions, breathing carefully, observing a landscape with curiosity, dedicating a few minutes to silence without the pretense of solving anything. These small gestures, repeated consistently, allow us to see the difference between living automatically and actively participating in what is happening. The idea is not to abandon obligations or neglect responsibilities, but to learn to find a balance in which productivity does not turn into dependency and the anxiety of control gives way to greater trust in the natural flow of events. A further step to initiate significant change is to rediscover the value of bonds. As mentioned earlier, a society founded primarily on competition tends to generate a sense of inner isolation. When you stop thinking of others as competitors, you discover how mutual support and interaction can restore a sense of completeness. Sharing fears, plans, and dreams without the fear of appearing weak creates a ripple effect of positivity. After all, there is no cultural development that can ignore human solidarity. Welcoming this awareness is equivalent to dismantling the illusion of extreme individualism and introducing into one's life the perception of being part of a varied human ecosystem. It is clear that Alan Watts's legacy cannot be reduced to a series of practical suggestions on how to live better, but constitutes a constant solicitation to question fundamental paradigms. According to him, change at a collective level will not occur through directives imposed from above, but starting from the daily choices of each individual. A simple action, like thanking someone for a small gesture, can start a larger process of inner renewal. The effect ripples, because those who begin to adopt a different perspective often inspire others to take a more conscious stance. Every time we recognize the futility of running aimlessly, we begin to erode the illusory structure that supports the great deception. The mystery of life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced, Watts argued, a phrase that encapsulates the essence of his message and reveals the purpose of this reflection. It seems that society pushes towards the idea of having to solve something continuously: goals, levels to reach, exams to pass, performances to optimize. Yet, it is by no means a given that this modality is the path to fulfillment. Alan Watts, whose voice still resonates today through books, recordings, and lectures, left us in 1973, but his ideas continue to live on and enlighten the minds of many people seeking a deeper truth.